Okay. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the session. I think most of you have probably met me either during the interviews or the previous session, but there are a few who I have not met. So, for those, I am Siddharth. I'm an assistant professor here at SaiU University. Uh, my area of specialization, so to say, is philosophy, and I'll be meeting you all quite often in the first term. Just before I begin, whoever has not already, please have your. Uh, I request you all to have your videos on. It's nice to look at you all. I mean, you can probably also have your audios on because I'd like this to be an interactive session, and that's how I thought of it. Uh, so today we'll be talking about critical thinking, which, as you might all know, is sort of a central aim of education in general and specifically of a liberal arts and sciences undergraduate program. So whichever school or you would be joining, the School of Arts and Sciences or the School of Computers, Science and Data Sciences, this thing called critical thinking is sort of at the center of the purpose of education, so to say, as it's conceived. And I'm sure it's a phrase that you all encountered. I mean, you all have some idea of what critical thinking is, I'm sure. And it's also a skill that you've all deployed to various degrees in your life so far. But the purpose and the aim of this session, I mean, the next 90 minutes or so, is to sort of give you an idea of what is this. I mean, since you all have an idea of it, I'm sure, to some extent, but have a little more concrete idea of what is critical thinking. What does it entail? What does it constitute of? What does it mean to think critically? I mean, of course, knowing what it constitutes is the beginning of knowing how to do it or how to practice it, how to think critically. And as one of the foundation courses that you will all be having in the first year is a full-blown course on critical thinking. So you will have enough and more opportunity to think about your thinking itself. But this session is to just give you a flavor of what it is. I have a PPT which I'll probably start sharing. But yeah, I hope you can all see it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Okay. But again, have your audios and videos on because this is going to be a more of a discussion. So feel free to interrupt me in between if you have some pressing question or an important point that you'd like to make. Um, Again, let me begin by asking you all. I mean, I had heard of critical thinking before I was academically introduced to it in any way, and I'm sure you all are. So, can some of you begin by sharing what comes to your mind when someone says critical thinking? And probably you can give an example of some instance where you think you thought about a problem or anything at all critically, where you practice critical thinking. This is just to get the ball rolling and get an idea of what you all think critical thinking is. Go on. Any of you, can you share
Sure.
comes to your mind and probably an example of where you indulged in critical thinking?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Who is this? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the PPT. So,
So this side is Deepak.
Deepak. Hi, Deepak. Yeah, go on.
So critical thinking is basically in this we don't think emotionally, we go factually. Like
Think
we
factually and emotion. So, okay. So, you think emotions and facts are in some way opposing each other, if I can put it that way, in our
yeah.
quest for thinking.
Yes.
Okay. Could you like to give an example of where you
Uh,
some problem that you thought critically in your life?
after
Any?
my 10th class,
Yeah.
we have decide our streams.
Okay.
So like we go on like if I take humanities, so what will be career options and what actually will lead to me, and like if I take commerce, so what I can be, what will be I after few years, and
Okay.
so this was the time when I had to think critically.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for the Deepak. I'll probably take a note of what you all say. Deepak, just told us that to think critically is to think without emotions. If I can just sort of paraphrase you, and the example you were while choosing a stream after class 10th, right?
Yes.
That's the thing. Okay. Sorry, I feel told the stream after class 10.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Deepak. Go on. Anyone else?
Jugal here.
Hi, Jugal. Yeah, go on.
Sir, basically, critical thinking means that you analyze the situation and based on that make judgments. Um,
Analyzing and judge,
yes,
analysis and judgment, right?
yes, sir.
What exactly is analysis, if I can ask you? I mean, what's
You
your
can
idea of analysis?
probably check the track record or something like how it has been played in the in the past and how it may play in the future. Kind of predict and
Okay.
take a judgment on it, and you
Okay,
just
analysis then
kind of
for you
evaluate.
looking for some kind of past records or what we can call evidence of some sort, right?
Yes.
Oh, and can you give an instance of
Um,
where you thought critically in the past?
Yes, sir.
Anything. You can.
When I was choosing my bank account, I had to. I used to have a bank account, and I had to change it to another one, and that is when I did a lot of research in what kind of bank accounts are there, like
Okay.
the savings rate, interests, and the customer service and stuff like that. And then
Mm.
from there, uh,
Okay.
I had chosen my bank account.
Okay. Which bank did you finally open your account in, if I'm asked? I mean, you
Yes,
can choose
bank.
not to reveal.
Yes, bank. I used to have one for the past 7 years at IOB,
Oh,
and then their customer service and everything was horrible. Savings
custom.
interest was bad, and then I had to
You
eventually.
opened one at Yes Bank.
Yes, sir.
Yes Bank. Okay. That's nice to hear. Thank you for that, Jugal. Go on. Anyone else? I think Jay Wadula, you seem to have dropped a message, but why don't you tell it out to us? Jay, I hope you're there. Okay. Anyone else? If you'd like to share your thoughts on this.
Yes,
Sir,
sure.
this is Kaushik here.
Yeah, Kaushik.
Kaushik here, sir. I would
Yeah.
like to add a word to what you said. Unbiased analysis and judgment. Unbiased analysis of facts and case scenarios, and then judging based on. So this
Okay.
I
Unbiased
want to add a
analysis
word.
of facts.
Yeah.
Hmm. Can you think of any instance where you have not probably chosen a stream of bank, but anything else where you deployed critical thinking?
I don't know if this comes into consideration for
That's
critical
fine. That's
thinking,
fine.
but
Go on.
in handling on group projects or any group team projects,
Mhm.
handling if you are a team leader or such, handling the opinions of everyone equally without being biased on your close friend or something.
Okay.
I think we've come across this critical thinking and
Okay.
for
Okay.
the
Hmm.
for the betterment of the team process. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Thanks for that, Kaushik. We'll probably have one last response from anybody.
Sir,
Yeah. Who's this?
Shri Priya here. Shri
Oh,
Priya.
hi, Priya. Go on. Go
Yeah,
on.
I feel critical thinking is looking at an issue or like a topic from various point of views, from like a global point of view to like an individual perspective
Hmm.
to looking at multiple perspectives exactly. So
Hmm.
an example would be in my 10th grade, I had a subject called global perspectives,
Hmm.
and we had to do a lot of critical thinking in that, like
Uh,
research projects and all.
okay. Research project. So when you had to think critically when you are doing your projects again, similar. And this, I think, is sort of similar to what Kaushik said, because he also said we need to look at multiple perspectives of the people in a group and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
I think you're all sort of
Excuse me, sir.
tending to. Yeah, someone was saying something.
Yes, sir. I would just like to add one more point.
Who's this?
I'll-
Pawan.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Pawan. Go on.
Sir, I think critical thinking is where you don't follow your instincts, but rather go by stats and data.
Hmm.
So that's what.
Okay, if I can say resisting one's instincts,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you're all sort of tending towards or pointing and moving towards an understanding of critical thinking, and these are all important points. We'll sort of hold on to this, park them aside for the time being, and probably do a small exercise where I would urge you all to think critically. I mean, it's perhaps a low stakes issue, so to say. I mean, you'll have to often think critically about very significant things like choosing a stream on which perhaps your career might depend, or when you're doing projects, often you work on large things like how do we, uh, I mean, address social issues or some engineering problems or science problems and things like that, right? So let's look at a probably what might appear at first sight as a relatively simpler issue. So I'll be showing you a series of photographs, 6 photographs. Look at them, take them in, and at the end of it, I'd ask you all to tell me which photograph you like, one of them, and why. Okay. So I'll start showing you these photographs one after the other. And then at the end of it, I'd like you all to share as to why you like a particular photograph. Okay. Uh, I'll probably maximize the screen. Okay. You all can see a tiger and a deer.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So just have a look at it. Take it in, reflect on what you feel or what you. All right. I hope you've all taken a good look at it. Uh, I'll move on to the next photograph. Oh, sorry. Okay. I hope you've all taken a good look. I'll move on. I'm sure some of you at least can identify these two gentlemen.
That one's Muhammad Ali.
Okay. The guy who's
The other,
the other, I think that's a slightly trickier question. Can anyone identify the other one who's been knocked out? Okay. That's another. I mean, he was a well-known boxer as well. His name is Sonny Liston, and this is a really famous photograph. I don't know if any of you have seen this recent Tamil movie which came out, in which I think the hero, who's also a boxer, sort of recreates this scene. It's on. Some of you might have seen it. Okay, I hope you've all taken a good look at this as well. I'll move on to the next one. I'm sure you'll all be able
yes,
to recognize where this was taken as well.
at ISRO after the Mars orbiter
Yeah,
mission.
this was taken after the successful launch of Mangalyaan. I think this was from their Bangalore office. Okay, I hope you've all taken a good look at this. I'll move on to the next one. This is Shimla, a place some of you might have visited. I have, but it looks beautiful for sure. Okay, I hope you've all taken in this photograph. We'll move on to the last one in the series. All right. I hope you've all seen all the 6 photographs. Well, now I'd like you all to tell me which of this did you like? Which of these did you like and why? Of course. Anyone who wants to go first? Go on, whatever you feel like. I mean, all
Hi.
of these were nice photographs. So, but anyone that you particularly liked and why? Veda, you wanted to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I like all of these photographs. They're
Mm.
pretty creative photographs, I would say.
Mhm.
But I think I specifically liked two of them.
Okay.
The one where the child is playing on an abandoned jeep, I think,
Mm.
and the one with in Shimla.
Okay, but let's stick to the first one that
First
you
one?
said, the
Okay.
child playing. But why did you like it?
Um, so I think maybe because so it looks like an abandoned jeep, and it doesn't. If we see it somewhere, we probably wouldn't want to touch any of the railings because they could be rusted. But you know how children always find something and innovative and creative to find play with, even though it may not look very good. I think maybe because of that. I'm not sure
Okay.
how to explain it, but
Okay. I mean, you seem to be saying something like this photograph portrays the child's instinct of finding use in everything, in things that
yeah,
we might think are otherwise wasteful or waste or are
yes,
not very useful. Okay, right? It sort of portrays children's instincts of or innovativeness, if I can just sort of quickly
yeah.
say innovativeness. Okay. Thank you for that, Veda. Anyone else?
Got it. Jugal here again.
Yeah, Jugal, go on.
I like the one. I like the photo of Shimla.
Okay.
Uh, Reason being that some I just feel like if when I'm old, I might retire. I might stay in such a place where
Okay.
it's cold, calm, and just like
Mm.
you just don't have to do anything.
Okay. I mean, you like it because the photographs portrays the kind of place you'd like to retire and
Yeah.
finally settle down as kind of a nice place to rest and relax. Okay. Thank you for that, Jugal. Come on, anyone else who has probably not
Yes,
spoken up so far?
this
Yes,
side.
Rishita
Yes,
this
Sunil.
side.
Okay, we'll go one at a time. Rishita, go.
So I was intrigued by the first photograph,
Oh, the tiger one.
the
Yeah.
tiger one. I love animals, to
Yeah.
put it
Because you love
simple.
animals.
I love animals, and I wish to see this scene.
Mm.
I wish to behold this scene with my eyes, not in photograph.
Yeah.
I wish to witness this,
Okay.
where a tiger hunts for a deer.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, Rishita. I mean, of course, did a sort of a thrilling moment that was captured. Thank you. Thank you for that, Rishita. Someone else.
Yes, sir. This side, Deepak, sir.
Deepak. Yes, Deepak, go on.
Yes, sir. I like the Shimla one because, sir, the combination of artificial creation along natural beauty, it makes it more, it makes it look more beautiful.
Okay, that's an interesting point. You like it because it shows both natural as well as man-made beauty, right?
Yes, yes.
Man-made beauty. Yeah, that's a. I at least didn't look at it that way, but thank you. That's a really interesting point. Thanks for that, Deepa. Come on, a few others.
Yes,
Like the one about ISRO.
Just a minute. Who said Isro? Was it Garima?
Niyati.
Niyati, yeah. Niyati, go on.
I think it shows our success. The happiness on their faces is so very cheerful, and
Hmm.
it is very inspiring to see something that they have achieved this feat.
Hmm. Okay,
The
so
happy faces
I
are
mean,
so very
of course,
overwhelming.
it's a
That's what I think.
the photograph. The Isro photograph showed success and achievement after hard work and shows the relation and that sense of pride and happiness. And it was really famous, and that's probably the reasons. Some of the reasons, at least, why it became so famous. We have a couple of hands up. Mahalakshmi, go on.
Sir, my favorite picture was the first one about the deer and the tiger. What I
Okay.
saw was different from Rishita. Rishita also
Yeah,
liked
yeah.
the same pictures. What I saw was the importance of vigilance.
Oh, it
How
shows the
important is to be alert.
importance of vigilance.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
How important
Oh.
is to be alert.
So who's being vigilant here, the tiger or the deer or both?
I think the deer was not being vigilant.
Was not being vigilant. Okay. Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. I think we have a few other hands. I saw Navya's hand as well, right? Navya, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go on.
Yes, sir. I like the first picture.
Okay, the
Guess
tiger one.
it really, yes, sir. I guess it really showed me the perfect balance of nature, the food chain.
Hmm.
Yes, sir. The first thought that I got into my mind after seeing that picture was about the nature and the perfect balance of it, and also the different emotions of the tiger and the deer.
Hmm.
As you can see in the picture, it's obvious the emotions of the tiger and the deer.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that, Navya. We'll probably take one last response here. Garima, I saw your hand first before.
Yes, sir.
Rakshajas. Yeah, go on, Garima.
I like the ISRO photo most, where they were celebrating the victory of Mangalyaan. So this shows when we do hard work for any success, for any mission, and if we get the success, it bears fruit, and we are happy for it.
Okay, thank you for that. Uh, Maybe we'll also take Dakshaja. I think you had your hand up as well, right?
Yes, sir. I like the last picture because the fact that it's in black and white is something that really something that made me think, it is kind of unique compared to the rest. It stood out when compared to the
Okay.
rest, and it is very aesthetically pleasing as well. So,
But yeah, why do you like it? Why do you say it's aesthetically pleasing?
I think the way it has been captured, in which the person from inside the train is portrayed as well as the surroundings. So the combination of both of them has been captured in a nice way, is what I think.
Okay, thank you for that, Dakshaja. This was quite a interesting set of responses that I think you've got here. But I'd like you all to think. I asked you this question of, okay, I mean, just to sort of reflect on which question, I mean, which picture you like or which photograph you like, then you all given me this. But what were you all doing when I asked you this question? For example, when Dakshaja just said that she liked that picture because it was in black and white, what was she giving me? Obviously, she was giving me an answer, but in the process of in giving me a response, what is she doing? She was giving me, I mean, any words that come to your mind or any
thought process.
Yeah, of course, she was thinking. She was thinking about why she liked this picture, and she was giving me dash for it.
Analyzing.
Yeah, she was analyzing as well.
Opinion.
She was not just airing her opinion, but she was giving me, like Navya said, I like this because I mean, I don't know if she actually used the word because, but in effect, that's what she was doing, because that picture of the deer and the tiger portrays a balance and shows something like the food chain, right? So what was she giving me in
Reason.
response to the question?
Reason.
Description.
Reason.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I think Jugal and someone else said you're all giving me reasons, right? And I mean, when I go back and look at the other examples that you all said of what were you doing when you were critically thinking, right? When, for example, Kaushik said we need to be unbiased and analyze the facts. But of course, you analyze the facts, and then what do? You say, okay, from the analysis of these facts, it looks like this is the best college to choose, or this is the best biscuit to buy, or this is the best vaccine that I need to take, or something like that, right? You look for reasons. Why do you analyze facts? Because you need to look for reasons to arrive at certain conclusions, right? I mean, this is something we all perhaps do, and we do, but in some sense, unreflectively. So I think the first point that I really want to highlight, and this might seem like a pretty obvious thing to a lot of you, that whenever we think, almost invariably, we exercise reason, right? I mean, any question that we do, or any action that we take, or any belief that we form, or any opinion that we air, right? When somebody asks us for an opinion, what do? We give reasons. And that's what you all did when I showed you these photographs. You all gave me reasons as to why I like this photograph, because, or hence. These are all some keywords we use when we reason, right? And thinking almost always involves reasoning. And hence, I think the first aspect of critical thinking that I want to highlight is that since thinking involves reasoning, when we want to think critically, we need to sort of ensure that we have adequate and proper reasons for the beliefs that we form, or the actions that we'd like to take, or the solutions that we propose for any of these problems. And hence, critical thinking involves reflecting around reasoning and, in some sense, monitoring them, right? And reasoning an important aspect of reasoning is logic. And logic is, in some sense, the governs the rules and norms of reasoning, right? And there are various rules and norms that we all follow, perhaps unwittingly and unreflectively. Can any of you think of any rules of reasoning or rules of logic that you've all come across? I'm sure at least some of you who studied more formal logic and things like that in subjects like mathematics or computer science would know. I mean, very, very, very basic rules of reasoning or logic.
Washing hands before eating anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's a more practical guide, but I'm telling what is a more general rule of reasoning.
Logical reasoning.
Yeah, I think Swaminatha wanted to say something.
Logical reasoning.
Correct. Can you give me an example of a rule of logical reasoning?
And or not.
And or not. Okay, but what is the rule that involves the and or and operator? Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? Any rule of logic that you've come across?
You problem solving, like
No, correct. I mean, problem solving are all exercises that you do when you reason. I mean, for example, I think you said and or not. I mean, you're all getting there, right? So one of the rules that involves the and function is, if X is true and Y is true, only then is X and Y true, right? I mean, you all have this Boolean logic. Some of you might have studied. I'm just giving some examples. Or, for example, another very, very, very simple rule of reasoning is everything is identical to itself, right? I mean, this is all a very, very simple rule of logic that we all use. Or something else. Something cannot be both true and false, right? For example, it cannot be true that it is at the same time raining and not raining right here, right? It cannot be the case that I am in pain and also not in pain. I mean, these are all perhaps we all know this intuitively, but it's quite surprising how even such allegedly simple rules of logic and simple rules of reasoning are things that we all go wrong and sometimes. And I was just giving some examples of what rules of reasoning might be. And often reasoning has hard rules in some cases, or at least broad norms. Another sort of a slightly not a very formal rule is something like, okay, when somebody gives you a reason, you engage with the reasons that the person gives and not with the person. For example, you don't say, oh, the reasons are bad because the person is evil or person is someone I don't like, right? So that's a norm of reasoning. The norm of reasoning is you tackle the reasons or the logic or the argument that the person gives and not the person itself or the person themselves, right? Broadly. And this is, in fact, the whole study of logic. There is formal logic, there is informal logic, and I don't want to get into that. But I think the first really important aspect to when you want to think critically, it is important to recognize that thinking involves reasoning, and hence critical thinking requires you to sort of monitor whether you have adequate and proper reasons on which you're basing your beliefs, your actions, and your solutions. So that's sort of the point that I want to make first. All right. So now thinking involves reasoning, but there is an important aspect in reasoning that I'd like to highlight. Let's sort of go back to all these reasons that you gave, right? Okay. Niyati said that she liked the ISRO picture because it showed success and achievement, right, Niyati?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Suppose I am someone who doesn't like the ISRO picture, assume for the moment, and I ask you, of course, it shows success and achievement. I agree with you, but so what? So what if a photograph shows success and achievement? I mean, that means nothing to me. I don't like it. I mean, I agree with you that it shows success and achievement, but that's no reason for me to like the photograph itself, right? So what would your response to that be?
Our thinkings are quite different then.
Correct. Of course, I mean, it shows that our thinking are different, but you're supposed to convince me right now that it is indeed a good photograph, and the portrayal of success and achievement is significant, and it's something that I need to pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
So, but what do you think? I mean, but you are going somewhere when you said that our thinking is different. In what way is it different?
You don't seem to see the things which I can. Like the picture is very much a symbolism for success after the long hard work of whatever they have done, which I seem to have realized and you have not. Maybe that's why our thinkings are different.
Correct. So, what does this say about our tastes in pictures or our idea of pictures? I mean, idea of photographs itself. Anyone else? I mean, I'm just asking Nate because she said that, but what does this disagreement itself show?
Everyone.
I mean, I'm also reasoning, right? I'm also reasoning and saying that, yeah, I agree that this photograph portrays success and achievement, but that to me does not make it a good picture at all. I mean, that's in some sense irrelevant to how I evaluate the photograph. If I say that, so what would you say? I mean, Nayati sort of got there, but anything else that anyone wants to say something? I think Jugal.
You convince with people's emotions.
I didn't get you. Could you come again?
You convince people using their emotions.
Okay, you're saying to convince me, Niyati would have to sort of
bring in patriotism, like it's our country's first attempt and and stuff happened.
Correct. Okay. All that is fine, but I'm saying okay, that doesn't matter to me. I don't want. I mean, I don't really particularly. I mean, just because the photograph shows a great achievement of the country or the state or school or whatever or the institute. So what? Okay, yeah. I mean, it evokes a sense of pride in me, but that, I mean, why does that make that picture really good? It could be a very ordinary picture still, or so somebody could say.
Sir, I would quote the proverb, beauty is in the beholder of the eye. So it's subjective to people, sir.
Correct. Okay, of course. That's sort of also what Niyati said, that we had disagreements because we all feel differently. But based on the different feeling, when I'm reasoning, what exactly is different in our reasoning, in the way we reason?
So you're looking for the photography skills. You're not looking
that's
for
fine.
the
Whatever else I'm
essence
looking,
in the
whatever else I'm looking, I might say that only photographs which evoke nostalgia in me, if it which reminds me of my childhood, are good photographs. Say I assume that this doesn't really remind me of my childhood, so it's not a good photograph. So what is different in the way that I am reasoning and Niyati is reasoning?
Feelings.
Of course, our feelings are different, but
Reasoning criteria.
correct. So reasoning criteria or something. I mean, something like that. I mean, perhaps a better way to describe it is, I think, we are all working from different assumptions, right? Or the criteria, as you call it. I mean, you can, but I assume, or my starting point is, I'm basing my reasoning on the assumption or the criteria that, oh, only a photograph which reminds me of my childhood is a good photograph, whereas Jugal or Niyati seem to think or seem to assume that a photograph which evokes in them a sense of pride, which portrays success, right? All those are really good photographs. I mean, I'm not telling which is correct or wrong, but all I want to point out here is when we reason, we often base our reasoning on certain assumptions, right? Let us just take any other example. Like someone said, a black and white photograph makes it unique, and along with the way it's captured, right? Dakshaja said that. I mean, I'm not debating whether a black and white photograph itself is good or not, but at least we see that she is basing her reasoning on some kind of a assumption or a principle that something that's in black and white is something to be appreciated, right? Or something in which the photographer has taken pains to capture, which is not easy to capture, is a photograph worthy of appreciation. And that's what adds value to the photograph. So we see that she's reasoning based on certain assumptions. Now, I'm not saying that all assumptions are equally valid or equally something that we need to consider. But I think the second really important aspect of critical thinking is to recognize that whenever we reason, right, whenever we give reasons or build arguments, they are based on certain assumptions. And it's only when we recognize this can we move on to identifying what those assumptions are and then questioning them, right? I mean, I gave the example, but I would think it's a really bad assumption or a criteria to think that a photograph is good only if and only if it reminds me of my childhood. I think that's a really lame sort of, I mean, not to say that pictures that evoke nostalgia are not good, but to think that that's the only criteria is, I think, not a great idea. But if that were the reason that I'm giving, I'm basing it on that assumption, right? So when you tell me or try to convince me that I'm wrong, this is the assumption that you're supposed to point out and tell me that that's probably where I'm going wrong, right? So I think the second sort of important aspect of critical thinking is to recognize that reasoning always is dependent on certain assumptions. And we want to think critically. We need to identify these assumptions, question them, and see if they are acceptable, right? Often these assumptions are, we might take these assumptions because that's what people around us all say. I mean, why do you like this actor? I like this actor because all my friends say he's the best. Now, that's often an assumption that we all work with, right? That's how peer opinion are formed. I mean, that's fine. But when you want to think critically about it, you need to recognize that this is the assumption based on which you're reasoning, whether you realize it or not, right? And critical thinking involves questioning these assumptions. Whether, okay, does it really make sense to like an actor because all my friends around me say he's a good actor? I mean, it might, because it might, for example, give you a sense of group identity or things. But all that you can think about only if you recognize that you are reasoning based on this assumption itself. All right. So I think the first, to sort of quickly recap what we've been discussing, thinking involves reasoning often, and hence to think critically, we need to reason in certain acceptable ways. And reasoning always involves assumptions. And hence, to think critically, we need to identify and question these assumptions. All right. So here, any questions or any thoughts, even if you think what I'm saying is way off target, you can sort of wear that views. But any thoughts or anything that you'd like to share here, any of you? Go on.
When you spoke about assumptions,
yeah,
and having, when you gave the example of actors and why we like them, if you take it on the negative side, like why don't you like a particular actor, for example, can the word stereotype be related to this, or is
that's fine.
stereotype?
Yeah, I'm not here saying a particular stereotype is right or wrong. I'm not getting into that. But I think to think
No, sir, I
critically.
wanted to ask, like, is that term right for this particular topic? Like,
No,
for
a stereotype
making
is
assumptions, is that the right
correct.
word?
Yeah, correct. Okay, stereotyping is one way in which we make assumptions, and that's often has a negative connotation to it. I mean, it's good if we don't stereotype people, right? But what I mean by assumptions here is a little more general. Any reasoning that you give is often based on assumption. For example, someone asks, "Why not going out now?" And you say, "I'm not going out because it's raining," right? But there's a hidden assumption there. For example, the hidden assumption being that you don't want to go out and get wet, right? I mean, that's a very, very, very simple example where there is an assumption. I mean, for somebody who wants to get wet, I mean, say who loves playing in the rain and whose parents or people around them don't frown upon getting wet or don't say you will get cold or things like that. I mean, because it's raining, that might be extra reason for them to go out, right? I mean, probably not very common to see, but all I want to show is there are assumptions that whenever we reason, whether we like it or not, and often disagreements or any problems become really sort of hard because there are these assumptions which we don't realize at all. I mean, if you take a moment and think of anything that you've reasoned about or any problem that you've analyzed or thought about, they always involve these assumptions, and it's worth thinking about how we form these assumptions. And often these assumptions are valid, but it's good to know because that's probably the reason why someone else is disagreeing with you, because they work for the different assumptions. I mean, there's perhaps a more technical term for it, but let's stick to the word assumptions for now.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you, Dakshita. I think that was a good question that brought out a good clarification. Anyone else? Any thoughts at all? Go on. I mean, any thoughts that you have about this? I mean, even if you think something is wrong or right, or it provoked you or reminded you of something else.
Sir?
Yeah?
Sir, can't we reason without assumptions, sir?
It's hard, right? I mean, often what we think are not assumptions are just assumptions which are widely accepted, right? I mean, like, for example, you're not going out because it's raining. I mean, that's something that almost always we seem to accept, right? But if you see, you never, almost all your reasoning is based on some kind of an assumption, something which has the potential for disagreement, right? Can you think of can you give me an example of any where you exercised reasoning? Anything, right? For example, you thought you decided to join the session, right? I mean, you could have probably thought, no, let me just go catch a movie on Prime on Netflix or something like that, but you chose to do it. And what was your reasoning behind that?
Gain knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably idealistic, but what was the more practical reason behind joining this session? I mean, you thought, okay, it's good to know a little more about the university that you'd like to join or something like that, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, something, or whatever the reason
Sir.
might have been.
Familiarize.
Yeah. Lalit, you saying something?
Like to familiarize with the university.
Yeah, like to familiarize with people, and of course gain knowledge as well. I'm not denying that, but I mean, that is all also based on some assumption, right? That if you join and the speaker would be good, or there would be something to, I mean, learn and things like that. For example, or so if you say invariably every decision we take has some kind of tacit reasoning involved, and whenever we reason, there are these unsaid assumptions. Often these assumptions are widely accepted, but not always, right? As we saw in the photograph case. I mean, it would seem very obvious to a lot of us that what makes a photograph really good is because it shows some kind of achievement. But perhaps for a lot of people, it does not. And to identify why people disagree over this and to think critically over the situation, you need to identify this assumption. And I'm using the word assumption very, very broadly here, right? Often there are good reasons why you can accept an assumption. Like, I mean, it's good to assume that you don't go out when it's raining. I mean, there are good reasons why I accept it, because when I'm going to work, I don't want to get wet and sit, or you can fall ill, or you can get dirty because there are vehicles passing and they're going to splash the puddle or something like that, right? So that's fine, but it's almost never the case, or I would think never the case, that you're reasoning without, I mean, without an assumption. There are always assumptions involved, and think critically involves identifying and questioning them. That's part of an important part of critical thinking itself. All right, we'll probably now go and revisit one of the pictures, and it was often, I mean, I've done this a similar session with some other students as well, and invariably, people never sort of, very few people say that they like this picture. I mean, I don't know why, but yeah, I mean, I thought it's good to revisit this picture. I mean, this is an iconic image in some sense. I'm sure you all heard of the magazine Time. It's an American magazine, I think, and at the turn of the century, they chose this as one of the 100 iconic photographs, right? And in the article where the critic was sort of describing this photograph, he had this to say. Can you all take a minute to sort of read what this writer is saying about the photograph? Garima, you asked till what time this will go on. I think this will go on till 5. We'll wrap up by 5.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay. Have you all read it?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Can someone maybe quickly summarize in simpler language what the author is trying to say? Anything. What is the author trying to say here? Anybody?
Sure, I'll try.
Yeah, go on, Vida.
So the author is talking about the image of Muhammad Ali and the other boxer who I do not know. So he says how Muhammad Ali is radiating the strength that made him. I'm not sure what. Oh, it's brashness. Okay. He talks about how his strength and brashness made him the nation, which is probably, I mean, I think not just the nation, maybe the entire world, most beloved athlete, and how he talks about at a moment when sports, politics, and popular culture. I think he means how Ali broke a lot of shackles of society by becoming a great boxer in the 60s, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Anything that you think Veda missed? All right. I think she sort of captured what the author is saying. This photograph is, of course, not just shows victory or strength and things like that, but it sort of radiates and portrays the kind of person that Muhammad Ali was. He was a very polarizing figure, as in a lot of people really idealized him. On the same hand, a lot of people didn't like him at all for various reasons. I mean, and this photograph, it seems to sort of portray this dual reception that Muhammad Ali received, and this photograph captures and seems to explain why. And at the same time, the critic also says this image perfectly captures the times in which it was set in the 1960s, where the public sphere, politics, culture, and sports and everything was undergoing radical changes. And for the critic, this photograph seems to portray all of that. So when I read it, it seemed to me that that's quite a lot of thing that this photograph is in fact showing, right? I mean, the critic is reading a lot into it, but if you really know about the history of the 1960s, of what Muhammad Ali stood for, he stood, he took a very strong anti-racist, anti-war stance, and on the kind of celebrity, a public figure he was, what the critics seems to say makes sense in some sense, and you sort of understand uh, why this image has really become so iconic and such a famous photograph. So, and this got me thinking. I mean, how do you learn to appreciate photographs like this, or in general? I mean, this is a very different kind of reason that the author is giving, right, for why this photograph is a really good photograph. I mean, it's sort of very different from the kind of reason that you all give. I mean, some of you said that you like the photograph because it portrays success, which of course is, but here the author is saying it not only portrays success, brashness, or arrogance, or strength, or victory, hard work, all these things. Of course, it does all this, but it also represents and stands as a portrayal of the times of the America of the 1960s, right? So how do we reason this way? I mean, to even reason and to think of the photograph as a portrayal of the times, one needs to know a bit about the times, right? About the times in which it was set, the 1960s. So I think this sort of highlights to me that critical thinking, of course, depends on reasoning and knowing to reason and being reflective about the assumptions, but it's often dependent on various other skills as well. Here, you need to have a certain kind of imagination, if I can call it aesthetic imagination, to sort of look at the picture in this slightly different way. You need to be able to imagine the various ways in which a picture could be good, the various ways in which a picture could be evaluated. Apart from that, you need to have a kind of awareness about okay, how America was in the 1960s before you can learn to fully appreciate the picture and think critically about it, right? So, of course, critical thinking is important, reasoning is important, but it's, I think, important to highlight that critical thinking is not something that just happens in a silo. It's not something that happens in isolation. It happens along with the development of various other faculties, such as the faculty of imagination and various other strengths, like having good general knowledge and good general awareness, right? So I think that was an important point that I wanted to make. So to quickly recap, of course, critical thinking involves monitoring one's own reasoning and following certain norms of reasoning. It involves questioning your own assumptions when you reason, but at the same time, it goes along with various other skills and faculties, such as the development of imagination and having good general knowledge and things like that. All right. Any question or anybody who wants to say something? I think some of you have been relatively silent, but so I might have to probably call you out and ask what you feel about this. That's all right. Or anything at all that you want to share. Do you sort of disagree with what I just said in terms of perhaps what the critic was saying about the Muhammad Ali picture didn't really make sense, and one doesn't really need to imagine of all these different ways in which you need to think of pictures. I mean, often when we look at certain paintings and or things, you might not really understand why. What is it that they are saying? I mean, why is this really such a wonderful painting? It seems relatively straight. I mean, simple or nothing worthy of appreciation, right? I mean, often we come across certain pieces of art or pieces of things like that. But I think it's important to sort of understand that even before we learn to appreciate certain things, we need some kind of background knowledge, right, to think critically about these things. And it's important to realize that when you want to think critically about any issue at all, I mean, it's probably quite obvious in works of art, but it's also perhaps relevant in various other streams of knowledge as well. All right. Okay. Did any of you change your mind about the Muhammad Ali picture after reading what that person had to say?
Sir, Rishita this side.
Yeah. Hi.
I
Hi,
feel,
Rishita.
hi sir. I feel that critical thinking is something which is not always required.
Okay.
Sometimes you need to keep things simple. For example, if we take this picture only,
Mm,
and let's say if Muhammad Ali wouldn't have been who he is, and he would have been some white man,
mm,
and the other person who's being defeated would have been some black person.
mm,
So the news companies and all, they would have made another rush out of it, that okay, they would have made it a racist thing,
mm,
that white, and at that time in America, this racist issue was a major thing, black versus
mm,
whites. It was about the blacks' rights. So
mm,
they would have turned the issue into a whole different thing, which is not required, I feel, always.
mm,
Critical thinking should not be involved. Sometimes you should keep things simple. You should keep your life simple.
mm. I think that's an interesting point that you make. But I mean, why do you? I mean, I can understand perhaps your disagreement with a portrayal of, okay, if perhaps it was a white man who was fighting and who defeated the African American, uh, perhaps there might be a certain kind of a narrative or something which media might have drawn upon it. But why do you think that I mean, that's wrong, and the thing to blame for that is critical thinking, right? I mean, even if you want to convince people that uh, the scenario that you described was not an instance of racism, which is what you seem to think, right? I mean, if there was a white man who had defeated a black man, that was not.
Or vice versa, if it would have been a black man who had defeated a white man,
Hmm,
so the media would have portrayed it as the blacks are rising onto power. They're no more going to be, they're no more going to be under the shackles of the white at that time in 1960s,
hmm,
pertaining to that scenario, not in today's time frame.
hmm,
At that time, could have turned into some other issue, which
hmm,
I feel is not required. Like the purpose was a game, a sport,
hmm.
in which it is inevitable that one would win, the other would lose. And that's what happened. It's as simple as that. But involving politics, like the narrative of the critic, like he's involving politics and a whole lot of things, I feel it's not required. I mean, it's a sport. You should have that sportsman spirit.
Correct.
You see a game, and that's it. Why involve politics and culture in it?
That's all right. I mean, I'm not saying what you're saying is right or wrong. I mean, you could have these disagreements, but but even to make that point that you're making, that you should perhaps stick to what is shown in the image and not read too much into it broadly, right? How would you convince somebody of it if not you think critically and make an argument for it, right? I mean, whether we like it or not, I mean, somebody else is
What do
all
I have to convince? Like, I'm not
like for
getting, what do I have to
no, no. For
convince?
example, I mean, you seem to have a disagreement with the kind of reasoning that the critic is making, right? But the thing is, people are going to reason that way. I mean, whether the critic likes it, or the critic was just one example. For a lot of people, this might have been an inspirational moment, right? And for people who lived through the 60s, when they look at this photograph, say in the 1990s, they would have appreciated this picture for that reason, right? But I'm not saying whether that's right, wrong, or anything like that. But if you were to reason in a different way and say that, no, no, whatever reason that they are giving is perhaps not right, we need to stick to what is shown in the photograph, right? I mean, we don't have to bring in these additional things of the cultural, political context in which the event took place and the photograph was taken. If that is what you want to say, even for you to reason that way, you need to think critically, right? That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so You're
And how
basically asking me to reason out that why am I
correct? Why
saying
do you
that we
saying
should
that?
not
And
involve
yeah, correct.
politics?
Yeah, correct. Otherwise, it's just, oh, we should not involve politics. But why? Why should I accept what you're saying?
Why? Why?
No, that's
Because
fine.
I
Correct,
feel
correct.
it it just out it enlightens the rage of
Correct.
the people. It turns into things turn ugly if you involve politics and culture with sports. Like, for
All right,
example,
all right. No,
India
no, that's
versus
fine. You don't have
Pakistan.
to. No, it's fine. I mean, you don't have to give me a response. I think the more important point here is when you're making that point, you need to have to back it up with reason, right? I mean, whether the reasoning ultimately is right or wrong is a further question. But when you want to think critically, so here what you're doing is in the process thinking critically about the kind of argument that the critic is making, right? But just can't say that, oh, we should not involve politics
I have
because that,
to back
yeah,
up
you'll have to
with the
say why.
reason.
And then if you say your assumption here seems to be that involving politics sort of always poisons the cup broadly, if that's the sort of reason, I'm just shortening it. But then somebody might say, no, that's a wrong assumption to make, which was the second point that I made. You will have to question your assumption and then back it up. Of course, in this discussion where perhaps we don't have to, we can just say, oh, I agree to disagree or things like that. But often, I mean, this was just an example of a problem, right? And often problems, you cannot do that. You will have to reach a consensus in often problems. So that's where you need to identify that, okay, the disagreement comes because this is the assumption you're working from, whereas the critic seem to have assumed the exact opposite of that, right? So how do you
Right.
resolve this disagreement, or how do you?
Right.
So you need to think. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not arriving at what is the right wrong answer. I don't know enough probably to
There's
say
no
that.
right or wrong.
No, there might be.
There's
That's also not. There might be rights or wrong answers, but it's often hard to find those. You need to think critically, and you need to think really hard. And to do that, you need to have a lot of background knowledge of. I mean, there are various disciplines of where aesthetics and photography is studying. There is, I mean, there are knowledge systems which look at how culture is portrayed. I mean, what is the relation between popular culture, like sports, and politics and society and things like that, right? So it's often a slightly kind of a tricky
And
situation.
the most recent example of why I just made this point was when Neeraj Chopra on Twitter went on
Hmm.
to make some statement about
Hmm.
the Pakistani
Hmm. The other javelin player and
spokesperson,
things like that.
the javelin, and
Correct.
then people were making all sorts of chaos out of it, and then he only requested that not to involve
Hmm.
politics and religion with
Hmm.
his game. So
Correct. Correct. So yeah, that's the thing. In some sense, on the one hand, simply saying we should not involve is not going to be very helpful because people are going to do it anyway. So how do you convince them? I mean, there are
right.
various ways to do it. I'm not saying reason is some kind of a golden arrow with which you can convince everybody, but often that's a good place to start. And when you have to reason and when you have to look at what are the kind of assumptions that people are working from. Yeah, before I move on, Navya, you had a hand raised.
Yes, sir. So I just want to say that I didn't totally change my opinion on this
Hmm.
picture, but I changed the way I look at a picture. So basically, knowing the backstory
Mhm.
uh, importantly. So because, as you said, to make a point, you need to back it up with a reason.
Hmm.
So when you truly know the backstory of that picture of whatever you're looking at or judging at,
Hmm.
you come up with a good reason, with valid reasons,
Hmm.
more valid reasons.
Hmm.
Yes, I just want to say that.
Okay, so at least even if you didn't change your opinion, at least it made you think a little more about it.
Yes.
Okay, that's nice. Anyone else who sort of had a change of mind, or at least it made you think, Jugal?
Sir, I don't have. I just have a question, a simple question. Um,
We'll get back to questions, but just for now, we'll have some time, maybe the last 10
no,
minutes for
it's
questions. So hold on to your question. Anyone else who sort of had a change of opinion about this picture, or at least it made them think a little more? Sneha Bhaskaran, we haven't heard from you at all. I mean, that whatever the critic said, did it sort of uh,
Yes, sir.
okay? I mean, did it change your opinion, or did it sort of
It
prod you
basically
to
depends on how person sees the picture. Yeah, as you already said, you have to know more about the picture uh,
Hmm.
before judging the picture. So It depends on the beholder's eye. That's all.
Okay. So, but okay, whatever the critic said, at least made you think a little more about it then.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? I mean, forget the critic. You all heard what each other had to say about the various photographs, right? Did any of your friends convince you that, okay, this is
Sure.
indeed a good photograph, which
This
you
said,
didn't? Yeah?
sure. Like we have various dimensions to see a picture. Like I may have a reason that like the way the Muhammad Ali is showing his like arrogancy, like because he has won. So like I may look from the one who has lost. I may like lost the match. I may look from his end that so I may not like the picture.
Okay. Okay. I agree. I mean, okay. So, did any of you sort of do you agree with Deepak? He says that, okay, I mean, you're all looking at it from Muhammad Ali's perspective, but think about the poor guy who he's just knocked out. I mean, it's in some sense for him, this photograph is not about victory and brashness, but it's suppose the plight of the guy who's lying down. I mean, do any of you find that convincing, or is it prodding you to think differently about the photograph? All right. I mean, not just this. I mean, you all heard what
Yes,
each
sir.
other had to say. Hearing what others say, did any of you change your mind about any of these photographs, the other ones?
So it
Jugal?
it did not change my mindset, but although I learned more about other people's mindset or how they think rather.
Correct. So when you see that what others think, but does it? I mean, ideally, I mean, the good thing would be to then question your own assumptions and see, okay, is whatever others are saying, does it sort of make sense? I mean, doesn't mean you have to accept it, but at least it's good to question your assumptions based on what others say, right?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I hope it does that, but
What I think is it all depends on what you want, what you're thinking, and how you want it to pan out. Like, what do you want from a picture? Like, what do you see in a picture and stuff like that?
correct. So those are some sort of the assumptions on which you're working. What do you want from a picture? But often it's not like I mean, these are not fixed, right? These are often fluid things. It's good to bring to the foreground, like, okay, I've liked these pictures because this is what I was looking at these pictures, but that's a choice you can make, right? So unless you bring to the foreground the assumption based on which you're working, you may not even realize that you have this freedom to choose what to like in some sense, right? So that sort of goes back to this thing of when you want to think critically about any issue, you need to question your assumptions, right? And that's how you realize that there are these other options also broadly. But I think the other point why I was asking you all is to, did any of you change your mind, is to sort of highlight this fact that critical thinking requires certain attitudes. And here, I mean, this
open mindedness,
it requires an attitude of being open to discussions, right? And being, I mean, as you question your own assumptions, you also need to know what are the various other assumptions based on which you can work, or what are the various other perspectives from which to look at things, look at problems. And sort of the easiest way, of course, you can sit alone and think about all the things, which is sort of the stereotypical image of a thinker, right? Thinker just sitting on their chair and thinking with hand on their mind. But often that's not how we think. We think when we talk to people, when we sort of test our ideas uh, I mean, along with people, hear what they have to say. So this requires a certain frame of mind, a certain attitude of being open to discussion. But at the same time, when you're open to discussion, does not mean you just accept what people say. Rather, you develop this attitude of healthy skepticism. Like, you're open to hearing what people say, but then you evaluate them for yourself. You reason out whether these assumptions are valid. So, of course, critical thinking involves reasoning, and reasoning involves questioning your assumptions, identifying and questioning them. And it involves these other skills such as imagination and having good general awareness. But it also, the way we build knowledge and the way we think is often social. So it requires these certain attitudes of being open, having an attitude of healthy skepticism, and at the same time, you what you think and the way you think is often sort of has to go along with a certain ethical worldview. I mean, I don't want to get into that, but often you need to use your skills of critical thinking towards ethical ends. So this is the fourth important aspect of critical thinking that I wanted to bring out. Critical thinking, or any course on critical thinking that you take, or any book on critical thinking that you would have various other factors which are very important. For example, we all have biases, and there are common biases that we all fall prey to. So how do we overcome that? And another important issue which sort of brings to the fore the need for critical thinking is the kind of news that we get. Who do we rely on for information? Who do we trust? I mean, the issue of fake news is, I'm sure you all have come across. I mean, we don't even know if we can trust the so-called reliable sources. So how do we evaluate what is reliable, or who do we trust? And those are all things that go into critical thinking. I don't want to get into that, but these are the four sort of aspects that I wanted to highlight in this session. We have maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Any questions or any thoughts that you all have?
So a question.
Yeah, go on, Jugal.
Do we think critically in every single situation of our lives?
Thank you. I think this is a common question of, it's easy to say we need to think critically, but we can't often we can't think, right? Or some might say, oh, all this thinking leads to analysis paralysis. I'm sure that's a phrase that you've all come across. I mean, those are all really valid concerns, and often it's something that we work out for each other, right? I mean, in this case, when you're probably the low stakes scenario of just looking at photographs and thinking about them, perhaps there is not much at stake. So we all know we might think about them for 5 minutes, but not beyond that. But if there are heavier issues and issues of much greater significance, I mean, there are whole teams and commissions where you need to think critically about various issues, right? So those are things that you need to decide for yourself, depending on the goal, depending on the purpose of why are you thinking at all, right? So those are things which which are the situations in which you need to think, is something you need to decide depending on your priorities and the situation and the context. I mean, there is no single answer to whether you can think, but at least you need to have the option of critically thinking about anything open before you can say, okay, I need to take a decision. I don't have the time to think. Let me just go ahead with it, which is how we all operate in the world. But at least it's good to have the option of, or the attitude to reflect on things and think critically about them. Any other questions? And some of you have not spoken at all, but I'd like to hear from all of some of
I have
you.
Doubt.
Yeah, who's this?
We should keep in our mind we should keep a kind of difference between a normal thinking and a critical thinking, or we should we should believe that the critical thinking is a more and refined way of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's not a very clear distinction between thinking and critical thinking, as is with any other skill. Think about singing, right? I mean, you sing and then assume you go and practice, take classes, singing classes, and then you learn to sing. And then whenever you sing really well, right? I mean, you have your voice modulation and things, and then you maintain your pitch and then don't go off tune and things like that.
Yes.
So that's the thing. I mean, critical thinking is, as you sort of practice it like any other skill, you become better at it, and then it becomes sort of second nature to you, at least to a certain level. I mean, whenever you read a newspaper article, you probably identify that, oh, the argument that this person is making is not right, or this person seems to be making unreasonable assumptions or things like that. So yeah, thinking, whenever we think, we ideally should think critically, but it's a skill that we pick up with time, and like with all skills, you get better at it with practice, and it's something you learn all the time. So there's no real distinction between, it's not like, oh, now I'm just going to think, but now I'm going to think critically. No, that's not how it happens. I mean, thinking ought to be by its nature in some sense critical and reflective, right? But often, as Jugal also raised, it's not possible to do it, but we can become better at it, and once we become better at it, we sort of do it instinctively, I would think.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Anyone else? Sainila, we haven't heard from you at all.
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, Akash, go on.
So is it okay to sometimes to go with the someone else thinking?
Again, I mean, there's no easy answer to it, right? We all have to. For example, when we go to a doctor, I think I mean, I'm just using the doctor as an example. Often the knowledge difference between what we know and what an expert knows is so different, right? But even then, in some sense, you would rather believe a doctor or someone who's knowledgeable rather than anyone else. And to do that, you have already thought critically a little. So even to choose whose word you trust or whose opinion you are going to accept as is, you need to have thought critically and then decide for yourself, right? Okay, that's fine. I trust this person. This person has been trustworthy, so I would just accept what this person says. So yeah, I mean, there are of course situations where we have to trust people, we have to take their word and take their opinions, where you cannot afford to think for yourself for various reasons. You don't have the time, you don't have the knowledge, or you don't have access to information and things like that. But yeah, but even to know, or to that decision of who do you trust that way, or whose opinion you take that way, is often based on certain reasoning which you do for yourself. Like, oh, I know that this person's opinion has been useful for the last 10 times, so it's probably this person is a reliable person. And that's how we normally operate, right, in life. So to think critically is to sort of be a little more reflective about that.
Sir,
Yeah.
excuse me, sir.
Yeah,
Is
go on,
it always
Akash.
sir, is it always compulsory to have our thoughts only while critical thinking? So we can use someone else's experience as our
Absolutely,
knowledge
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. And that's exactly what I mean. That's really important. To think critically, you need to involve other people's perspectives, right? Because often we cannot know information alone. I mean, this idea of someone who the solo thinker is just a useful myth in some sense. I mean, there is so much happening in the world. So obviously, we will have to rely on others for information, for their opinions, but then decide for yourself, right? I mean, even this choice of who do you rely on, or who do you go for information, or whose opinion, or who do you, in some sense, outsource part of your thinking to, is a decision that you will have to make, and it has to be a well thought out decision often.
Okay.
Others?
Thank you,
So
sir.
I think you missed out one point, which is the person's frame of mind when he's analyzing the picture.
Hmm.
Like me as a student analyzing the ISRO's picture showed it kind of depicted my the image of me celebrating after clearing all exams or whatever I have after struggling for 2 hours. Then my friend Rishita here liked the tiger's picture because
Hmm.
she said she has been an animal lover for quite some time. I think
Hmm.
that also is a key factor when we analyze things.
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely right that people have very different perspectives, right? Broadly, what you mean by frame of mind is they have very different perspectives, largely because they've all gone through different life experiences and things like that. And that's exactly why you need to be sort of open to discussions, because we can't think of all of this on our own. And you need to understand what are the different frames of minds or different assumptions based on which you can reason, right? Or the
Yes.
what are the different ways in which you can think. And that's sort of the reason why I said it's important to have this attitude of openness. It's only then can you understand different frames of minds. But that's a really important and interesting way in which you put that. I mean, it once again highlights the need for this openness and how one cannot work out all these things. And that's why you need to talk to people. That's why you need to take the effort to understand people and put yourself in their shoes by talking to them, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you for that, Niyati.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, hi, Sai, Nila. Go on.
So, could critical thinking and overthinking be connected, sir?
Correct. And I think this is again a very important question. I think a question that people often come up with, and I think Jugal also sort of asked it. And yeah, how do we know we are not overthinking things? Again, there is no easy answer to it at all. One thing that I can think of is it's important to have the purpose of why are you thinking about something, the problem at hand at all, right? I mean, again, let me just, use the example of looking at these photographs. Often here, it's, we can just say, okay, that's your perspective, this is mine, let's agree to disagree. There is nothing much at stake here, right? When we are discussing the photographs, but to sort of keep on discussing it and catch hold of the other person and trying to understand them might actually uh, sort of put them off. So that's when you know that you're overthinking. But often some problems are really significant, and the decisions you make or the way you approach the problem can have very significant repercussions. And that's when you need to really think a lot more, speak to a lot of people, take time. So whether you're thinking or overthinking or something that, and depends on the purpose of the exercise, and that depends on the context. But often that can happen in terms of people are just thinking, oh, I'm thinking too much. That often happens when you're thinking alone, right? Because you just keep getting, it's like chasing your own tail and thinking of the same things. And at those times, I think it helps when you talk to people. This is all again something we do all the time, that when we are confused and when you're thinking that you're not really making headway and you're just thinking about the same thing, you talk to people, get different perspectives, get different ways in which you can think about the same issue. But the larger thing is, there is no answer to when do you stop thinking and when do you start overthinking. That depends on the context and the problem at hand. All right, any other thoughts or any other
last one
like to share?
Last.
Kaushik?
Yes, sir. I have two questions in particular. People say stress upon the importance of critical thinking, but people also stress about being an spontaneous person. So my first question is being a critical thinking person is opposite to being a spontaneous person. My second question is, being a critical thinking person, distance yourself and experiencing the spontaneity of life, like jumping right into an adventure, train adventure, or anything spontaneous. In order to experience a very spontaneous things, should you be a spontaneous person, or just you have to be critical thinking person as well as spontaneous thinking person? I'm quite confused about that.
I get
kind of narrative.
See, in some sense, critical thinking is not the one tool to solve everything, right? It's an important thing that we develop. You use it at important times, and I think the point that you're making, I think the point that emerges is you need to know when to use it as well, right? And that again depends on the problem at hand. There are perhaps some problem in which you need to think a lot about, but probably not when you're cracking a joke or something. Because spontaneity is an important part of humor, right? Or when you want to surprise somebody and things like that. That's perhaps not. But again, that's, we can decide that depending on the purpose of what we want to do. When you're there to enjoy the moment, when you were probably doing an adventure sport or something like that, you want to be spontaneous and do things like that, right? So it's not like critical thinking is something that you keep doing all the time. But I think an important part of that is to decide for yourself, or with guidance as to what are the things that you want to really spend time thinking about, right? So I don't think it's a really, like, it's not the two are not in opposition to each other. It's not like if you're a critical thinker, you cannot be spontaneous. You can decide for yourself, okay, these are things I want to be spontaneous about, right? And then it's not like, it's not like for every single decision anybody is ever going to keep sitting and thinking about the problem, right? I'm thirsty, I just go drink water. I know this. That comes from practice or things that you know, and you choose for yourself what are the things that you want to think about, or what are the things worth thinking, spending time to think and reflect upon. So critical thinking is not like a very simple tool or something that you just this thing. It's an important, since thinking itself is a important part of life, and it's in some sense messy, and while these are all just sort of broad constituents of what critical thinking is, it's a really big debated thing of what are even the norms of reason, how do you reason, and that's why you have these various different knowledge systems at all. So yeah, to sort of answer your question, they are not really in opposition to each other, and you can decide ideally you'll have to decide for yourself what are the things worth thinking about. and which aren't. Maybe we'll take one last question from Sri Priya.
Yes, sir. It's not a question. It's more of like a thought. But
Yeah.
like, let's take the victory picture for example, where Muhammad Ali wins. You showed us the reporter's response or like the reporter's thoughts. I feel like when like pinpointing or like targeting the emotional side of a conflict or like a emotional point of view of something you see has a greater impact or like it's a contributing factor to have more impact on the person. So do you think it's like critical thinking or is it more of like for media reach?
For?
For,
I didn't get that.
for like media reach. So like the reach of like more people.
Again, I mean, okay, I don't know. I think what I understand your question is, you think the way that the critic was reasoning is he just saying that, I mean, does he really think that the photograph is good, or is he just saying that to sort of reach to people and convince them or sort of appeal to them emotionally?
Yeah, to target their emotional side to like, yeah.
See, I don't know. I mean, why are the two might not really be in opposition, right? I mean, it's not like we often think of emotion and reason as very two separate things. But I mean, we'll probably get into this a lot more when we do the course or think about what reasoning is, but that's often not the case. Emotions sort of are an important part of reasoning, right? I mean, we all reason and want to take decisions that evoke certain emotions in us. For example, we want to, I mean, very simple, we want to do things which will make us happy, right? So it's not that emotions and reasons are not doing, and if a critic wants to write and say that this photographs appeals to certain emotions, I mean, that need not necessarily be a bad thing. I mean, it might be when you want to appeal to certain kinds of emotions, right? But it's at least important. But you're already thinking critically, and that's a good thing. You're already thinking that one way to think of pictures is to think about the kinds of emotions that it evokes, right?
Yeah.
And that's, you're already thinking critically about what are the ways in which looking at a picture, and that's good. And that's a further question: what are the kinds of emotions that pictures ought to evoke? I mean, there could be photos and very powerful images which can evoke very undesirable forms of emotions in the public. For example, the emotion of vengeance. I mean, it might spur people on to violence and take revenge on another set of people, which is what very manipulative media do, right? But already thinking about this thing of, okay, thinking of what are the kinds of emotions that a picture can evoke is, you're already on the path of thinking critically about it. So, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying what the critic said is right or wrong, but at least it's pointing you to another way of thinking about the picture. That was really the purpose of putting that up there.
Thank you so much.
But thank you for that, Sripriya. I think we had one last. There was a hand up. I don't remember whose it was, but that hand seems to have gone down now.
Sir, I
Any
have
other
a question.
questions before we conclude?
So, question.
Yeah, Jugal, go on.
So, is having second thoughts is it anyhow related to critical thinking? Like even after you think, and then you think again about certain stuff. I don't know.
I don't know. It might be, right. I mean, it's often, sometimes second thoughts are helpful, and it might point you to certain newer ways of looking at things. And sometimes it might just be doubt that's from a lack of confidence or due to uncertainty and things like that. It could be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, perhaps being reflective and is, I mean, is also what we sometimes call having second thoughts, and that might be sort of stepping back and looking at things a little more critically. But at times it could just be a fear of uncertainty and things like that. So, I mean, I don't know. So sometimes having second thoughts could be a spur to critical thinking. In other times it might not. I mean, that's again for each person to sort of decide. You can maybe quickly think that, oh, this is just my fear of the uncertainty. Let me go ahead, because you probably might have already thought out what you wanted to think. In other cases, it might not. I mean, I think that's a slightly broad answer, but in some sense, there are no easy rules. It's not like, I mean, thinking about things or there are no very general things except saying that you need to reason. And there are some broad norms of reasoning. But beyond that, it's in some sense a messy affair. And that's why thinking is so hard. And that's why we have so many problems about which it's not easy to find answers, right?
Is it always beneficial to think critically?
I mean, again, it would think yes, but perhaps if it's an emergency, I don't know. I mean, thinking critically perhaps involves thinking of when do you, knowing how much to think and when to stop thinking and start acting, right? And that's again something you decide depending on the context, depending on the limitations, depending on the purpose of your thinking. But I would think as a general rule, it's if you can, it's good to think critically and evaluate your options, right? All right. I mean, this was just a very, very brief introduction of just putting it out there and sort of introducing you to what is critical thinking itself. And we'll be having a full course on this, which will delve deeper into it. But the purpose of this was to just give you an idea on what critical thinking is and let you all sort of think about it. But I hope it was useful, or at least pointed to some directions of what critical thinking is. And as I said, this is something we have all done, right? It's often reflecting on what you do or what you think you do right, or what are the things that you don't do. And these are all things we have all done to various degrees. I mean, we've all thought critically and thought deeply about various things, and at times. So to sort of make it explicit, it's helpful, because then it becomes something that you can do consciously, that you can do with intent. So all right, it was really fun, and thank you for being a very responsive audience, and it was good. Thank you for that. We are a little past time, so have a good evening,
Thank you, sir.
all of you.